What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back with another Four Corners video breaking down tonight's NBA slate, courtesy of Osmo.com. There are 7 games tonight, a few of which have really high Vegas totals, so let's get the energy up. Like the video right now, leave a comment down below, tell me which player you're liking the most from what you're seeing so far. Of course, I'll pop in later, answer some questions, chat it up with you guys, so do that now, like the video, and leave a comment. Now, without further ado, let's get to our first corner. It's a game between the Clippers and the Kings. And this one has a 238.5 combined total, which is the highest on tonight's slate. That represents a 6.8 point boost for Sacramento, as well as a 3.8 point boost for the Clippers. Willie Cauley-Stein's projected for 33% ownership, and that makes him the highest expected owned player on the slate right now. Some value should open up closer to lock, but Willie Cauley-Stein will probably be pretty high up there at a decent price, and he's versus a Clippers team who's allowing 48.6 rebounds a game, which is one of the higher marks in the league. So spot bodes well for Willie. He'll also benefit from Marvin Bagley not crowding him quite as much on the inside. So a good spot for Willie, and he does seem worth that ownership. Bogdan Bogdanovic is not far behind Willie at 28% expected ownership after a monster day last time versus Milwaukee. Again, he's another guy who should benefit from Marvin Bagley being out, some more usage for him to go around. The 3-point matchup isn't the best one. I think that worries me the most about Bogdan and Buddy Hield's prospect, Harrison Barnes as well. But I think the fact that Marvin Bagley's not going to be out there is going to help these guys out quite a bit. So overall, I'm comfortable with Bogdan, comfortable with Harrison Barnes, a little bit less comfortable with Buddy Hield because of the price, but overall, I think all these guys look fine enough. Harry Giles is a decent punt play who should pick up some extra minutes. He's pretty close to minimum price on DraftKings, which makes him very appealing, and he has some pretty good per minute performances so far this year, so Harry Giles is a guy I would consider. I think he could spike an upside day here versus a Clippers team who, again, very bad inside. Lou Williams should have the highest ceiling on the Clippers. In the last matchup versus them, he was 2 for 17, but he still put up 38 fantasy points. I think that bodes well for him today, as does the pace, as does the matchup. This looks like a great spot for Lou Williams, a guy who always fluctuates a little bit too much for most of the tournament players out there to roster him. So overall, Lou Williams, to me, one of my favorite plays on the night, and a guy who I think has some real tournament winning upside. Danilo Gallinari hasn't been getting there recently, but we do have a game here with a very high total, so maybe this is the time where he does break out of his funk, get a little more usage, and hit those shots at a high volume. So I like Danilo Gallinari. Also, Landry Shamet, kind of a similar play to me as more of a punt. Obviously, the ceiling a little bit higher for Gallo. Also, the floor substantially higher as well, but I think both those guys kind of comparable at different price points. Montrezl Harrell has averaged 39.7 fantasy points versus the Kings this year, and that bodes well for him again tonight. Obviously, nothing has changed with the Kings materially. If anything, they've gotten worse inside without Marvin Bagley. So overall, Montrezl Harrell looks pretty strong. Again, the Kings are one of the worst rebounding teams in the league as well, so you could see Harrell going, or you could see Ivica Zubac get going in the starting lineup. He hasn't been getting enough minutes right now, but if he does have a hot hand, you could certainly see him rest some minutes away. So I'll have some exposure for both those guys, but I think obviously the guy who's been more steady night in and night out is Montrezl Harrell. Next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Bucks visiting the Lakers. This one has a 238-point total, which represents a 3.6-point boost for Milwaukee and a 4.6-point boost for the Lakers. The big item to watch here is Giannis Antetokounmpo. He picked up just 24 minutes in that last game for the Bucks after being a late announcement on a minutes limit. So that worries you a little bit here. Does open up some opportunity for the other guys, but Giannis pretty hard to trust even if he does get up to, let's say, 30 minutes. Eric Bledsoe was the biggest beneficiary of that minutes cap on Giannis last game versus the Kings, putting up 67 fantasy points in an overtime game there. So I think this looks like a good spot for Bledsoe again if we are going to assume that Giannis's minutes are limited again, if we don't see an announcement otherwise at least telling us that. This is a late game on the West Coast, so we may not get that news before lock, but keep an eye out for it. I think Bledsoe looks like a pretty good play. Hard to trust him fully because he has shown some downside recently, but overall I think that Bledsoe looks like as good of a play as you're going to find on this Bucks side, assuming that Giannis does see his minutes decreased. Chris Middleton, Malcolm Brogdon, and Brook Lopez were all pretty big beneficiaries as well from that minutes limit on Giannis last game. They had a decent performance overall, 22 shots for Chris Middleton, 36.25 fantasy points for Malcolm Brogdon, which was the highest he's had since January 21st, and Brook Lopez put up 30.25 fantasy points despite shooting just 3 for 15 from the floor. So again, if you see Giannis minutes limited, you're going to see all these guys have a little bit more upside. And in a spot versus the Lakers, who were not that great defensively without Lonzo Ball on the floor, I think you're going to see these guys have a decent day as long as Giannis does see less minutes than he should get. Nikola Mirotic, also a guy who would be deeply affected by Giannis picking up some more minutes on that minutes restriction of his. He had a good game last time out, putting up 42 fantasy points in 37 minutes versus Sacramento. But if he gets down to, let's say, 23 minutes again from 27, which is where he was last game, then you're going to find it a little bit harder for Mirotic to hit that crazy high ceiling you need for a tournament. So I'm not crazy about him tonight, even if we know that Giannis is, let's say, limited to 30 minutes. On the Lakers side, LeBron James has been doing everything he can to get his team into the playoffs. He's averaged 64 fantasy points or over in 4 of his last 5 games. He's also averaging 39.8 minutes in that stretch, so you know he's going to be on the court, you know he's going to get a shot. It's not a great matchup versus the Bucks, but if anything, that's going to only help LeBron because he's going to have to really push the action in order to hit value, so, or even have a shot to win the game. So overall, LeBron looks like a really strong play to me and one of the better high-priced guys on tonight's slate. Brandon Ingram and Kyle Kuzma always grade out pretty similarly to me. Brandon Ingram's been the better play recently. He's been doing a little more across the court, just doing more assists, more rebounds, also scoring at a decent efficiency, whereas Kyle Kuzma's a guy who's been pretty just points dependent overall. He did pick up the start at center last game, which actually didn't help his value too much, but it did give him a more secure minutes load, so that's a positive. I think this matchup could benefit Kuzma, though, because he does shoot threes. Brandon Ingram really doesn't, and the Bucks give up a ton of threes per game, or a ton of three attempts at least, so Kuzma's going to have a shot to heat up here. I think that could benefit him and put him above Ingram, but both guys are close for me, so I wouldn't really heavily favor one over the other. And Reggie Bullock should also benefit from the Bucks allowing a league high amount of three-point attempts, 35.2 per game. He's not a guy whose price is that great right now, but again, the three-pointers could help him out a bit if he gets going, so I don't mind Reggie Bullock, just not a guy I'm going to force into a ton of lineups. Rajon Rondo started last game, and if he's starting again, I think he's a guy who could have a big day, but I would really want to just stack him with another shooter on this lineup, like Kuzma or a Bullock, or maybe one of the bench guys. But I think Rondo is going to be a guy who's going to hit value only if he's assisting at a high rate. Put up 16 assists in that last game. I think that's what you want to see from him. He also shot a lot and missed a lot, so I think that bodes well for Rondo. But I think in this particular matchup, you're going to see him pick his upside up by getting rebounds and getting passes out to the wings to hit threes. Next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Pelicans visiting the Suns. This one has a 237-point combined total, which represents a 9.8-point boost for Phoenix, which is the highest on the slate, and a 5.3-point boost for New Orleans. Devin Booker is now expected to play. The toe injury that he has is a bit of a concern. He really hasn't shown a ton of upside recently, but he's at a reasonable price. He does have that ceiling, which just gets very high that we've seen in previous seasons. So overall, I'm comfortable with Devin Booker tonight, especially if his ownership stays a little low because he's going to have that Q tag on him on most of the apps all day. DeAndre Ayton is expected to have 21% ownership, and that seems about right to me. He's had one good day versus the Pelicans earlier this year in their one matchup, putting up 39 fantasy points. So I think he's only gotten better since then, only gotten more reliable. So I think DeAndre Ayton's a pretty strong play tonight without a lot of really big high-priced center plays. Kelly Oubre and Josh Jackson should both chip in a little bit more with the scoring given this really high total that we have, a pretty big boost for the Suns. There's always some risk for the Suns. Their offense, not that good. The offensive efficiency, not that good. But I think these two guys were in good spots to really put up some points. I prefer Oubre slightly. His minutes are a little safer. He's also been willing to show that he's going to shoot a lot if he heats up. I think that's all bodes well for him. But Josh Jackson also in play. Both guys totally fine to me. Tyler Johnson and Mikal Bridges both look like decent values to me. Tyler Johnson, I find it hard to see him getting that ceiling with Devin Booker in the lineup tonight because he's not going to get as many shot attempts as he could get otherwise. But it does look like a decent spot for both of them. Again, I'm not seeing them necessarily as guys I want to have who are going to have that tournament upside, but I think they can be a part of a winning lineup, so I'm okay with them. Wouldn't force them in, but if they pop up in your lineups, that's totally fine. There's some back-to-back risk for New Orleans side because they are playing another game tomorrow versus Denver, so I'd watch out for that one because the last time we saw the Pelicans in a back-to-back since they announced their minutes caps, we saw limited minutes for Drew Holiday, for Julius Randle, and for Elfrid Payton, as well as for Anthony Davis only playing one part of that, so I'd watch that closely today because I think there is some real risk there. These guys don't see their full allotment of minutes. But for now, I'm going to assume that they get their full run of minutes. To me, that makes Julius Randle a pretty strong play here. Put up 51 fantasy points in 40 minutes versus the Lakers. Obviously, that sort of run is great. The upside that he showed there is great. And this matchup is a really bad one, a slower paced one, but still one that's going to have a lot of room for him to operate. Drew Holiday's had a steady role, some steady performances recently, but not showing a ton of upside. So I think he's a good play. Guy, if I land on him in lineups, that's totally fine. But I think with Elfrid Payton back there in particular, he's not doing a whole lot to push his usage up. So I think he's a good play. There's not a guy who's going to hit you that 60 fantasy point mark that's going to make him a must-have on the slate. Might be a revenge spot for Elfrid Payton going back to his Suns team. We traded for him and then didn't do a whole lot with him. Didn't really give him a chance to shine. So I'm a little bit intrigued by that at his price. Overall, I prefer Drew. I definitely prefer Julius Randle. And again, Elfrid Payton also suffers from the same risk of there being back-to-back minutes cut, which would open up minutes for Frank Jackson. Also open up minutes for Check Diallo if that did occur, just to point that out. But Elfrid Payton in a revenge spot, a little bit interesting, and I'll definitely have some exposure to him just in case he does really resent Phoenix for what they did. Anthony Davis also pretty close to playable if he's in the lineup tonight. He's just getting 21 minutes. It's a huge risk, but his price is down enough where I think he could have some upside. So don't mind Anthony Davis. Really don't feel comfortable with Anthony Davis, but if you land on him, why not? Last corner I want to hit on, this is a tough choice because you guys know I love the Hawks and the Bulls and they're playing tonight, and I really wanted to talk about that, but this one does seem a little bit safer. We've got a game with the Wizards visiting the Celtics. It has a 233.5 combined total, which represents a 9.1 point boost for Boston. Kyrie Irving's usage spiked to 36.1% last game as he tried to shoot the Celtics back into that matchup. Couldn't get there. Not a great spot for Kyrie, but he is getting an A in points and an A in value from Osmo in his rankings today. He looks like a strong play to me today. I think the Celtics are going to do everything they can to end this losing streak. They're on a 6-game losing streak. It's not looking good for them, but eventually they have to turn it around. And the Wizards defense, that's really not that good. Should be a spot where they can do that. Al Horford is also in a very solid matchup versus this Wizards interior, and he's also shown 62 fantasy point upside recently. He looks like a really good play, probably the best combination of both value and ceiling on the Celtics side. Marcus Morris is a solid lower price guy, and he also put up 41.75 fantasy points versus the Wizards earlier this year. Maybe some built-up resentment there from how they've handled his brother now departing town, so I think that could be an interesting spot to target him again. But overall, Marcus Morris is just a guy who every night is pretty playable. He has some upside. He's not going to have a ton of upside, but he's a good enough play. And in a matchup like this where he should get some open looks, he could get going. And again, because of the matchup, Jaylen Brown and Gordon Hayward, I would think one of them will have a big day off the bench, or at least a good enough day where they're definitely worth having in some lineups. It's hard to say. Gordon Hayward's been pretty bad recently. Jaylen Brown's been the better play. So I think maybe that could ebb back tonight. I think Gordon Hayward's in a good spot. I like the way that this matchup fits him. We're going to have some room to operate, some room to ball handle. So I like both those guys equally. I don't feel comfortable recommending Gordon Hayward, but he does seem due for a bounce back spot. Bradley Beal's been over 40 minutes and over 22 shots recently, and that's a good spot to be even versus the Celtics team. He's going to defend him about as well as he'll get defended. And I think that does mean that Bradley Beal is still very much in play. He's not as contrarian as I would like right now at 15% expected ownership, but he does seem like a guy who could spike an upside here, and the Wizards have been playing out of their minds, so I think Bradley Beal is going to have to be the one who initiates some action in order to keep the Wizards in this game. Tomas Satoransky is always a guy I consider in tough matchups because his playmaking ability and his ability to score in tight spots does help him out a bit. He doesn't really look for his own shot unless he has to. I think this spot could be one where he does look for it more. Just a tournament option, just a guy to have in a few lineups, but I think having some exposure does make a little bit of sense. The wings for the Wizards are a problem to parse out because they all look pretty good night to night. We have Trevor Ariza who's the most steady role. We have Jabari Parker who has some pretty big upside, but not as many minutes. And Jeff Green who's also been pretty good. Jabari Parker put up 37 fantasy points in 21 minutes the other day. Jeff Green has a 44 fantasy point day versus his former team, the Celtics, so maybe some spite there still in his heart. So overall, I think any of these guys are playable. If I had to rank them, I would probably go Ariza, Parker, then Green. But I think a mix of all of them would be nice to have if you can get him into your lineups. Thomas Bryant has been looking pretty good off the bench recently. 55 fantasy points in his first game coming off with Bobby Portis moving into the starting lineup. 30.25 fantasy points in his last game in just 20 minutes with Bobby Portis picking up the start again. I think he's actually got a better situation overall than Portis because there's just less usage to go around that second unit. Thomas Bryant can do whatever he wants. So Bobby Portis is an okay play, a guy who's probably not going to get you enough of a ceiling, whereas Thomas Bryant I think is a little bit interesting going against that second unit of the Celtics. It's not going to be as stout on the inside. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on today's NBA slate. Make sure to like the video right now. Leave a comment down below telling me your favorite play on tonight's slate because there's going to be a lot of options. And also click the link in the description. It's going to be the first link you see there. That's the switch and hedge column on Osmo.com. I have a lot more depth about all the games there, including the Bulls-Hawks game, which I couldn't talk about here, but I really do like a lot. So go click that link. Check it out now. And of course, use the promo code Switch and Hedge. I'm going to drop it in right here. Get 50% off your first month at Osmo.com. Get all of Osmo's rankings, as well as the ownership projections, which I discuss here, a very important part of building your lineups. Also get access to the premium Slack, which is a great place to talk with some like-minded people, get some ideas on how to build lineups, some information as well from our staff when we're jumping in there throughout the day answering questions. So go ahead, use the promo code Switch and Hedge, get half off your first month at Osmo.com. It's been a long week with a lot of NBA games, so thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Again, like the video on the way out. It helps me out so much, more than you realize. And I appreciate every single one of you for tuning in. I'll be back again on Monday with another Four Corners video. So good luck and enjoy your weekend.